what in God's name have I done? I was giving antacids to 2-month-old babies, topical steroids. I'd give them medications for 2 weeks. We'd stop them, and the kids would be back in the office a month later. Eczema, asthma, allergies, constipation.
Sure.
The biggest part of conventional medicine that I never understood. It was never, how do we look at the root cause of it?
Right.
Do we look at nutrition? One of the moms, she was breastfeeding. The little boy had recurrent ear infections. He had eczema. She said, I took dairy out of my diet and his diet, and his eczema improved. I said, keep it out of his diet. And that little boy in particular, his recurrent ear infections resolved. I just had to convince people why it was safe to go off dairy and how their kids' bones were going to be healthy.
When was it that you actually came to this conclusion that the conventional was just not enough anymore for how you wanted to practice?
I love that question. How much time do you have?
Oh, we've got plenty of time. Welcome to another episode of Freedom RX. I'm your host, Seth Conger, and today we're talking about something very close to the heart of every parent and practitioner: how we care for our kids. Too often, childhood illnesses like asthma, eczema, ADHD, allergies are managed, not solved, with medication after medication. But what if we flip that script? What if instead of masking the symptoms, we addressed the root causes and helped kids heal naturally? Joining me today is Dr. Sheila Kilbane, a board-certified pediatrician and trailblazer in the integrative health movement. Sheila's on a mission to help 1 million children live medication-free, and her work blends the best of traditional pediatrics with functional medicine to address chronic inflammation, gut health, and nutrition, all in a way that is practical, evidence-based, and deeply compassionate. So whether you're a provider working with families or a parent seeking answers, this episode is packed with tools, insights, and hope. So let's get into it. Hi, Sheila.
Hi.
How are
so
you today?
Happy to be here.
I know. I'm so happy to be with you. We're in person in Charlotte, North Carolina. I used to live here in Charlotte, North Carolina, so we got to spend a lot of time together when I was here, and then I went off with my family to Colorado, and we don't get to see each other so often.
The nerve of all of you.
I know.
But it's great having you back. And as we were talking before we started, we've known each other now for 8-9 years.
Yeah, since 2017. So we met at a Freedom Practice Coaching conference.
In Texas.
In Texas in 2017, although we were both in Charlotte at the time and didn't know each other here. And then we came back from Texas and sprung this beautiful friendship and professional relationship and all the things that we'll go through today.
Oh, yeah. And it's every time we see each other, we can't stop talking about all of these things. And it's been... Anyway, it's always good to chat with you. And I'm so excited about what you all are doing at Freedom Practice Coaching now. Because it's been, I went through the program, right? It was, I'm pretty sure it was 2015, completely changed everything for me. And I love, as we're all evolving, so is Freedom Practice Coaching.
Yeah.
And I love what is happening with you with the group now.
Well, thanks. You were you're saying over coffee earlier this morning that you learned more in 1 hour, and that wasn't even the actual curriculum. It was just the sales pitch.
Yeah. Yes. And it was just sort of, okay, take out a piece of paper. And at this point in time, I had been practicing. I had my practice for almost 3 years, and I didn't know how to make an Excel spreadsheet. So I had no idea how to run a business. And I went down to Texas to meet with everyone. And the person speaking said, take out a piece of paper and write down your monthly, your expenses, your revenue, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, what?
Can't do that.
Like I just I knew I was charging a certain amount an hour per patient. And I knew how many patients I wanted to see each month, but I was doing nothing else, to create a business structure. So it was eye-opening, and I thought, I have to do this. But I was also at a point where, because it had been 3 years, I was draining bank accounts, keeping this open, and I left and I thought, I want to do this, but I don't think I can do that. I called Charlie, who is the owner, and I was like, you know what? He's going to kill me for saying this. But I said, I don't think I can pay for this right now. So he was like, just start. You can start in a couple of months. And I just thought, and he is one of those, because he's this, when you meet Charlie, he is this, he's a big personality.
Yes.
And
the strongest teddy bear I've ever seen.
Yes. The kindest human. I feel like I could call him at any moment in time and he'd be like, where are you? I'll help you, right?
Yeah.
I'll come and change your tire, or I'll do. And so anyway, it just has been, I had an incredible experience. It completely saved my practice. Yeah. And to be on the other side of it, because I get practitioners will reach out every so often about FPC, and I have nothing but good things to say.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. We had a really cool little group we had in Charlotte. I had a brain health practice. You had a pediatric practice. Mike Smith had the naturopathic practice. Deb Matthews had the hormone practice. I mean, we like had this whole cool little group here in Charlotte for a while.
And that's what I always say for being a small town in the South. We have really amazing integrative medicine.
Yeah.
And I do think Freedom Practice Coaching was part of what fostered that, because we were all able to have successful practices. Because if you do this kind of medicine, it's really hard to do it in a conventional model, because you need more time to see patients. And if you're billing insurance, you're just never going to you're never going to be able to meet a revenue that's actually going to be a successful business.
Sure.
So I give my mentor, Russ Greenfield, who I think was a huge leader in integrative medicine and getting a lot of us to pursue this, and then Freedom Practice Coaching, because we were able to build successful practices.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a foundational element that a lot of practitioners don't think about is having that stability in your business. And I'm sure we're going to get there in our conversation, but it's just almost impossible to practice the way you want to without the appropriate business model. And then even when you have that business model, you have to find that stability before you can truly just lean into patient care.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting things that I will often tell practitioners is that the model that FPC teaches made me a better clinician, because I had to be more organized and I had to be very structured. And that was also because I eventually wrote a book. And part of that was because if I was going to say, okay, I'm going to take you on as a family, as a patient, and we're going to work with you over the next 6 months, 12 months, I needed to have kind of a curriculum, a set path of what they were learning, how we were approaching the child's health, because it's not only we want to get you back into bounds, right? We want to improve significantly or resolve altogether, whether it's constipation, asthma, eczema. And I want to be with you when we start to pull the medications, if and when it's appropriate.
Right.
We need to work together to figure out what the long-term roadmap looks like, which was always the biggest part of conventional medicine that I never understood. Is we had asthma as a good example. We were supposed to do check-ins with you. We had that set out. It was a step up and a step down of medication, but it was never, how do we look at the root cause of it? Right. Do we look at nutrition? Are the kids eating a very inflammatory diet, right? If we're using steroids, decreasing inflammation, are there any other ways that we can decrease inflammation, right? Which we know from functional and integrative medicine that there are many, many ways, and there's a whole lot that we can do in addition to the conventional.
Sure.
They couple together. That's what I always say. It's the best of both worlds, right? Yeah. We don't ever throw the baby out with the bathwater. I love me some conventional medicine, and it's always the yes and is right. We're going to use the best of both worlds.
So when was it that you actually came to this conclusion that the conventional was just not enough anymore for how you wanted to practice?
I love that question. How much time do you have?
Oh, we've got plenty of time.
So
we've got all day.
it was really, and I'm preparing I'm going to give a TED Talk in August, which I'm really excited about. Thank you. And I just spent all day yesterday kind of going through and just envisioning how to articulate all of these things. But I was really probably a year out of residency when I thought, what in God's name have I done? I was giving antacids to 2-month-old babies, topical steroids, right? It was, inhaled steroids. We squirt them in the nose. We give them orally. We do them IV, and antibiotics. And I'd give them medications for 2 weeks. We'd stop them, and the kids would be back in the office a month later. And it was often the same. It was eczema, asthma, allergies, constipation.
Sure.
And I would also be convincing families for years on end that Miralax, which is a laxative, was okay to take. And then you open the packing slip of Miralax and it really says you shouldn't use for more than a week, right? If you talk to your doctor, and don't use in kids under 17. And I was like, oh, wait a minute, this is not what I learned.
Yeah.
So you start to ask these questions, right? We don't have a Miralax deficiency. Are there other things that we can do? And what happened is moms would come in, and I remember this also like it was yesterday, is one of the moms, she was breastfeeding. The little boy had recurrent ear infections. He had eczema. And she said, and he was about maybe 8 months at this time. She said, I took him off dairy. I took dairy out of my diet and his eczema improved. And I was like, well, I don't know why that is, which I laugh now. I really had no clue.
Sure.
And I said, keep it out of his diet. And then I'll call my friends who are naturopathic doctors who actually study nutrition in their training.
Right.
And I'll figure out how we're going to get fat, vitamin D, and calcium into them. Right. I know now
because we know how much calcium comes from cow's milk, right?
Right. And then it's not very absorbable. And there are bok choy, broccoli, right? There are a lot of other ways that we can get calcium. So it's kind of snowballed from there. And I would see we would pull dairy, and that little boy in particular, his recurrent ear infections resolved. And then I would see these other kids where we might take dairy out of their diet for constipation, which we kind of knew at that time that dairy might contribute to it. And they would start sleeping better. They would be calmer. Their transitions would be easier. Like I remember one day a mom came in and she said, you know what? He cleaned his bedroom without me asking him. Like, And it was just, so I always say I stumbled upon this stuff. It was not like if you told me 20 years ago, I'd be talking about dairy and eczema and children's health, I would have told you were crazy.
Sure.
I just loved medicine. I knew from the time I was a kid, I wanted to be a doctor. And then I got into it, and I was just, the disillusion was real. And so I was listening to moms, and then I'd start reading. And so much of what you see in general pediatrics has to do with allergies, whether they're environmental, and now what I know, food sensitivities, or just inflammatory foods. And that was around the time that my mentor, Russ Greenfield, was, because I was, shifting diet and doing all these things with the kids and seeing these incredible improvements. And Russ said, Sheila, why don't you go do the integrative medicine fellowship? And I was like, Russ, why would I spend all that money to hang a piece of paper on my wall, right? I'm doing this now, which little did I know now how much there actually was to learn about this.
Right.
So anyway, it was pretty quick to realize that I knew there had to be a different way.
Yeah.
But it took a long time to actually figure out, how can I do this in a different way?
Yeah. What was day one like with Dr. Andrew Weil?
Love that question also. So and for those listening, I think like my generation, people know Andrew Weil, but he's that guy with the big white beard. He actually looks very much like my dad. He's written tons of books, and the very first lecture he gave us was about breathing. You know, I had my computer and my notebook. I was ready to take all these notes. And he sat and we did a breathing exercise. And he talked about how breathing triggers the parasympathetic nervous system, right? Which is the relaxation side. Most of us are in that sympathetic all day long, that fight or flight. And if you're in fight or flight, your system isn't going to work optimally. It doesn't matter how much medication you use, how good your nutrition is, any of it, whether it's integrative or straight conventional, you have to have your body in the relaxation state more of the time than you are in the sympathetic state in order to have that, to get the health that we're all looking for.
Right.
So that was the introduction to it. And then it was all of the professors I loved. And we did it, most of it was remote, but we would go there 3 different weeks out of the 2 years. I never wanted it to end because you walk in and you're with 70 other physicians, clinicians.
Yeah, your people.
Who are in the same boat. Is they knew there was a different way to practice, but none of us really knew how to implement it into the day-to-day. And we were kind of doing some of this stuff with ourselves. I'd been practicing yoga for a long time.
Sure.
I was kind of doing a little bit of meditation. I thought I was eating decently at the time. I really didn't shift my own diet and really figure out my own health until many years after that, actually.
So how many in that class of 70 people, how many other pediatricians were there?
Was it the big goose egg? There were not many, and there had to be a few. I know there were a few med peds people, but there were a few, actually. Maybe it was less than 5.
Wow.
And they didn't have really any pediatric curriculum.
Sure.
That has changed now, but it was also part of, that was where the beginning of the book started, because even when I was in practice, I was having to make all my own handouts and reading different things, right? We would learn all of the adult things, but then I'd have to translate it into how are we going to
do this
how
for
are
kiddos.
we actually going to do this for kids?
So when you got back to Charlotte, how many other integrative pediatricians were there here?
Well, interestingly, I didn't know that there were any, but my friend, Linda Chun, who I went to medical school with, she had done the Andrew Weil program right before I did. And she's a med peds. And she said to me, Sheila, there are 2 pediatricians in my class, in my integrative medicine class in Charlotte. And I was like, no, there aren't. I would know them. And she said, yeah, and she looked it up and she said it was in Salisbury.
Oh, wow.
So and this was right after I had quit that was 2007. I quit my job and I was going to open a practice then and started doing research. And there was a consulting firm up in Salisbury. And so I stopped into Salisbury Pediatrics and I said, are Kathy Russo or Chris Magrita here? And Chris came out and we had a great chat. He's like, I was asking them if they liked the integrative medicine fellowship. So this was before I had started. And he said, best thing I ever did, changed my life. Absolutely do it. Wow. And down the road, he ended up becoming a very dear friend and we ended up, having a practice together for a period of time.
And down the road, I ended up hiring Kathy Russo in 2018.
Yeah. Small world.
Very.
Yes.
Very.
So they were the only ones, but we have since had more. We have a few more pediatricians now, but we really still don't have a whole lot.
So you get the education and you get back to Charlotte. You realize you're about the only one here and you're still working in conventional medicine. So now that you have the information, the knowledge, and you realize I've got to figure out how to implement this, how did you make that leap into private practice at that point?
So at that point in time, I'd quit my job and I was thinking about opening a practice. I still didn't quite have the courage to do it though. Mm-hmm. So I took a job of what we call locum tenens, and that just means I was a fill-in doctor.
Sure.
So I worked, and I always laugh. I think they said, it was one of the practices in Charlotte. They said, oh, we need someone for 3 months. And I ended up staying for 2 years. Loved them. And I only did sick visits, which is what I always preferred. I never enjoyed well visits when it came to general pediatrics. So it was kind of my heaven. And because I didn't really have a home base, I had a desk-ish in the practice, but it wasn't mine. So I had all of these handouts that I had created, and I would carry them. I had this little bag that I'd carry on my arm so that I'd have it in the rooms when I'd go in, because I wasn't going to prescribe an antibiotic for an ear infection and not talk to the families about a probiotic or about the fact that maybe they should take a little bit of time and take dairy out of the child's diet. So I had all of the instructions written out and I would hand it to them. And one of the, after you see a visit, one of the families called back one day and they had a question about our interaction. And the triage nurse said, well, which doctor did you see? And they said, the one with the bag, the lady with the bag.
The bag lady.
Yeah. They ended up getting me like a little lunch tote with the bag lady written on the outside of it. But it was, so I did that, and that helped me to realize how much this worked.
Yeah.
And it was just comical because, the other pediatricians, we all became good friends, but they would be giving me grief about, oh, what are you doing with the dairy? Or, so.
You're just drinking big glasses of milk in front of you and laughing.
Exactly.
They're like, I'm fine. You're like, no, you're not. No, you're not. You'll figure it out in about 10 years.
Yes. It built, it built my confidence of how well this worked. And so then it was at that time that I finally went and did the integrative medicine fellowship, but I had a little bit of leeway. And then I went and I worked for another practice for a couple of years, and that was with Chris Magrita. And then eventually I finally got the courage to say, okay, I'm going to open up my own practice.
Yeah. What year did you open your practice?
2012.
2012.
Yes.
Wow.
And so that tracks, because it was 3 years after that I joined Freedom Practice Coaching, because I floundered a bit, but I was burnt out at that time. So I didn't want to get super busy.
Sure.
Because I always call it the Heisman. I'd be like, I'll take on some patients, but I don't want to take on too many patients. And it was very different though, getting to do it in my own way.
Yeah.
But I kind of created the same treadmill that I felt like I'd been on in conventional medicine in my own practice.
Yeah.
And that's a hard pill to swallow because I didn't have anyone else to blame but myself.
Right. Can't point the finger at anybody at the administration. Why are they keeping me working so many hours and so long? And I want to be able to see people longer. And you realize you've actually created that monster yourself.
Yes. And, in retrospect is 2020, but I realized I didn't really know how to build a structure.
Sure.
And so it took a while of doing that, because I was not only trying to figure out how to run a practice, but I was also learning an entirely new way of practicing medicine. And when I think about it now, I have a wonderful pharmacist who works with me. And I think Deb came on board in around 2014, 2015. And we would be up so late reading through, the stool studies and the organic acid tests and just trying to understand how to implement these things for kids.
Yeah.
So, it makes me tired thinking about it.
What was scarier than an OAT test or a profit and loss statement?
Good question. I didn't even look at the profit and loss statement, so I wouldn't even.
We'll just keep this over here.
Kept my head
pretend this doesn't exist.
Buried in the sand.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it was highly needed at the time when I finally found FPC.
Nice. So now you have a thriving practice and you're known across the country, across the world. You've written a book. You've spoken everywhere. I mean, you're on stages. You're one of the most well-known integrative and functional medicine pediatricians out there. And you truly were a pioneer at a time when no one else was willing to get into this. There's very few across the country, and you've kind of pioneered all of these different parts, right? You had to write your own handouts. You had to translate all of the adult knowledge and education into pediatric. And so almost by force, you've had to come up with your own way. And I'm really interested in about that from kind of a medical and process standpoint, but also on the business side. What is your own way that you've developed after all these years?
Yes. And it is funny. You know how you don't really think about that stuff on a day-to-day basis. Sure. And then when you do, you think, oh my gosh, how far you've come.
Yeah. Well, it's easy to connect the dots when you look back.
Right.
But you can't going forward.
Retrospection is linear versus so the first thing that I would say, because I think it's a bigger, kind of the 50,000 foot view is we all have different personalities, and I'm definitely the person, I'm not going to keep doing the same thing over and over if it's not working. So I knew I had to do something. I didn't really know, but I'm also not risk averse. That doesn't make me nervous. So I knew that I had to do it differently. I mean, I was starting to get sick in the other practice because I would be fatigued right when you're doing something. It was just wearing me out.
Sure.
And I remember with the last practice I left, it was just gut-wrenching because I knew that I would be disappointing a lot of people. And the practice, the families. And I remember telling a couple of the moms, and they just looked at me and they're like, why did it take you so long? Like, we could tell you were unhappy, right? You think that you have this face on. So that's the first thing. I think you have to, understanding your personality and what you can tolerate. And I knew I had a pretty big tolerance for kind of jumping out into the unknown. And it kind of taps into a part of your creative part of your brain that you don't think about, because I would never think about myself as artistic or creative. But when you start, because you've got to weave the story, and you have to, when you're running your practice, you're kind of convincing people to do things that is against the grain. You have to be very compelling. And so you start, I mean, like dairy. When I first started doing this, so really 15 years, I mean, I've been practicing for a little over 20 years, but really got into the nutrition piece at least 15 or 60, maybe even longer ago. But I just had to convince people why it was safe to go off dairy and how their kids' bones were going to be healthy. So, that's—
I love that, safe to go off dairy.
It is. And I have to say a little bit of an aside.
Yeah.
So my friend Paul Smolin, Doc Smo, is a pediatrician here in Charlotte. He's retired now. I got to know him when I was doing locum tenens and loved him. And he had a podcast, which actually now Chris Magritta does. And he would call, I probably did, I don't know. I think we did 4 or 5 podcasts together, but he was just curious. And we would talk about dairy. We would talk about this integrative stuff. And at the time, he just thought I was nutso, but he was intrigued enough to keep doing it. And we would get on, we would prep for the podcast, and we would talk for an hour, until midnight, on a school night. And we ended up becoming good friends. And then, fast forward 10 years later, and he read the China study, and he was like, Sheila, you guys in integrative medicine, functional medicine, you've been right all along. And it was a really nice thing for him to say. Yeah. And anyway, it kind of evolves, right? So the first part of my career was just convincing people that they could make these nutrition changes and the kids were going to be okay. And they weren't depriving them and the kids weren't going to have these emotional issues because they were eating healthy. And now it's come to more, and this is what I'm going to talk more about with the TED Talk. It's we're seeing sicker kids. Right? 20 years ago, we could say, go off dairy, here's a probiotic and some fish oil, and the kids bounced back really quickly. Now what we're seeing is these kids have layers upon layers as we have children being born to people who grew up with high fructose corn syrup and Roundup, and we've shifted the gut microbiome so profoundly, at least in my reading of the research and what's going on. I think that's part of what has happened. And we just have to do a lot more, right? We have to do organic acid tests and stool studies. Yeah. And near and dear to your heart is we look at mold testing. Right. And I think it's taking us longer. We're seeing kids that have more sensitivities to things in their system. Their systems have more immune dysregulation. And I just think part of it is because we're eating a lot of things that aren't food. We're being exposed to a lot of things that are affecting our microbiome, our biochemistry, right? We're drinking out of all these plastics. We're putting things on our skin. We're cleaning with bleach. And we use a lot of antibiotics in the animal industry. We have a very high C-section rate. So the kids are coming to the world through a sterile field. Right. I just said a whole lot of things, but so that's where we kind of shifted, and then the medical side of it became a lot more complex than I thought I had signed up for, and it was challenging to learn this whole new field and figure out how to run a practice, run a
business at the same time. So, I think a lot about this. Expansion of childhood illness, right? And I mix circles, right? So I hang out with people who know nothing about functional and integrative medicine. And then professionally, this is where I live, right? But not being a medical professional myself, sometimes I can even be tricked by some of the information that is out there. And it's interesting that you brought up the fact that we are seeing more sensitivity. We're seeing more dysregulation. And I think the counter argument to that is, we have better diagnostics now, right? So we're just catching things more often and earlier. And I'd love to challenge that for a second, because you have gone in between these two different worlds, and you've actually seen this at a really interesting time where we have clearly gotten better diagnostics, better lab testing, better imaging, and it's incredible that we have that. But at the same time, this huge uprising in childhood illness. What do you think? You touched on it, briefly with things like Roundup and other chemicals that could possibly be in our foods. But what else is going on with this huge uprising of childhood illness?
Yeah, and it's, as I was preparing for the TED Talk yesterday, as I'm just getting, all of my stats and everything organized, it's really shocking. I mean, eczema is a good example. In the 1940s, the prevalence was about 5%. In the 80s, maybe 10, 12%. Now it's about 20% and even higher in certain areas of the country. Right? Asthma, we've got about 9% of kids have asthma. With food allergies, food sensitivities, all of these rates have doubled from roughly the 80s. And autism, it used to be 1 in 10,000 in the 80s. It's now 1 in 31. Yeah. Which these, in my opinion, right, when you look at certain areas of research that will say because of better diagnostics, I don't think that's the case. I think we have so profoundly changed our environment. And I'm kind of assuming that the listeners know what the gut microbiome, but let me back up just a minute, as we've got this collection of 100 trillion bacteria, microorganisms in our gut. And it's this whole teeming ecosystem. And it's the diversity, the makeup and the diversity of that ecosystem that plays such a big role in our overall health. It helps us break down food. It helps us synthesize vitamins, synthesize neurotransmitters. And when that gets thrown off, if you think about what we're doing to soil, right? If we're adding some good organic fertilizer, great. So our fertilizer is going to be things like fibrous foods, nuts, seeds, vegetables, fruits. How many kids, and I know the stats on this, is not many kids eat adequate amounts of fruits and vegetables on a daily basis, not many adults. So we're not actually eating the things that we need, and we're putting things into it that are harmful. And again, it goes back to if we're doing these herbicides, we're taking a lot of antibiotics. And we know the research that if kids have an antibiotic in the early years of life, it increases the risk of eczema, of asthma, of these allergic diseases. So we've changed so much about what we eat and what we're putting on our bodies that we've shifted the gut microbiome, and it's taking a lot. We just have to do a lot more work to get the kids back into balance.
Yeah. So I think, along those lines, there's also this belief that there is a single causation, right? So this happened and therefore it showed up as eczema, right? My child is allergic to this one thing and therefore they have eczema, or they, the allergy happens to be pollen or something like that. And clearly we have discovered that's not the case, right? It is a multi-causal environment that we're dealing with. And that could be from what you're eating, but it could also be from what you're breathing in, from the, the environmental relations that you have, and so many other pieces. So how challenging is that for you to work with these cases where you almost have to be a detective to figure out where is it coming from?
You completely do. And this also goes back to why I wrote my book, because it's the way that I simplified it. And that was what I loved. I always loved finding I think that's part of why I didn't enjoy primary care, is because I like finding out sort of doing that deeper dive to think through things. But the way that I laid it out for my book is the 5, right? Inflammation is illness, and the triggers of inflammation are food, environmental allergies, environmental toxins, which can be things like mold exposure from a water-damaged building, infectious diseases, and stress. And right, stress can be physical, it can be emotional. Like a physical stressor might be if you have scoliosis, and that's going to put some stressor on your spine. But they all weigh equally, and we don't always give everything its due credence of how it can affect us. And then you bring in these things like mold exposure that I've had to learn so much about over the last, 8-9 years that we did not learn about during our training. We learned the most extreme cases about, black mold and how that can make you sick. And I didn't feel like I had a huge toolbox on how to recognize it, what to do about it, how to test for it, what to advise a family about what to do with their home. And so it's also, as with everything, we just had to read and research. And Deb Allen, who is our pharmacist again, she's really she's an outstanding researcher. And she did a lot of the initial research that helped us as a practice understand what to do and how to help these kids and these families.
So asking for a friend, does mold have to be wet and visible to be dangerous for a family?
Great question, Seth Conger. So there's a big difference between mold. We have mold everywhere, right?
Sure.
You can have mold.
It's in 50% of the buildings in the United States, maybe more.
Yes. And you can have leaves mold in a wet leaf pile.
Mm-hmm.
That's a different kind of exposure. If you have a water damaged building, the kind of mold that grows on that, maybe it's Aspergillus, penicillium, they secrete toxins that go airborne, and then we breathe them. And the challenge with it is you can see a lot of health issues, but labs don't change a lot, or there are very specific labs that will do. And to kind of get the pattern, but it's just not the easiest thing to figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
And so it is a process, and it's kind of what I would call the walk around our biochemistry, is how we figure out what we need to look at and what we need to address.
Let's talk about that process, because I know you have a pretty unique process that you've developed over time in your practice, and we can use a real world example here. So my son Atlas, who's now going to be turning 8 on the 4th of July.
Oh my gosh.
You are his pediatrician, but have been since birth. And I'm very lucky that just kind of stumbled into a friendship with one of the greatest integrative and functional medicine pediatricians in this country, probably the world. And I get to also have you as my son's doc. And we had a mold situation when we lived here in Charlotte. We thought we were being incredibly careful by replacing all of the ductwork before my wife got pregnant. And of course, they left micro cracks throughout all of the junctions there, which grew mold over the course of a couple of years in a crawl space, very damp, extremely high moisture content. And we had no idea, right? So it wasn't until I actually saw the effects of this with brain fog, headaches, tons of cognitive symptoms, that we then identified that this was probably something going on with Atlas. And so walk me through, and we can use Atlas as an example here, but walk me through your process that you use for kiddos when you are dealing with something like this, where the parents kind of feel like they're chasing ghosts a little bit.
Yeah. One of the important things to remember, and I think it's the beauty of this process that Deb and I created together, is we look at things, we set the foundation, and we do good, solid, right, cellular health, digestive function detox, whether it's eczema, asthma, mold exposure. So this is applicable no matter what is going on. Yeah. When it's mold, we have to add a few extra things and a little bit more and different testing, but it really is a similar process to get the body into balance. And the red flags that we look for, we always we do a very long intake when we're going to see a family. And the three questions we ask: have you had any water damage? Have you ever found mold? Have you ever had any leaking appliances? And a lot of times there will be no to all those questions. Some we get in the visit and we say, do you have a crawl space or a basement? Or is it a cement slab? If they've got a sump pump in the basement. So there are all sorts of, and recently as well, we see families from all over the country, and people might live in hurricane areas, or, they may have had the house flooded. So when we ask that question, and then if there are things, especially kind of mood swings, up and down, trouble sleeping, eczema that continues to flare up even when the family is doing everything really beautifully. And you might have periods where it improves, but it can continue to flare, especially periorally is what we have found. The one thing that I remember about Atlas so much, because that was also earlier on, and we weren't really thinking about mold for him, but he had some really significant keratosis pilaris on his arms, and on his legs. And I remember, I hope it's okay that I say it, because I think this is on video also, but Seth is a good-looking guy. And you had some really dark circles under your eyes and some people do just have that, but those can be signs, and it's brain fog, fatigue. And we always look at, if we see a child and if anybody in the family has undiagnosed illnesses, and that's what we talk about, is fatigue. Maybe they're getting migraines that they'd never had before. Maybe their asthma is worsening. We had another family of a little boy who he had been diagnosed with pandas, which we could talk about that for hours. But the mom, her asthma was getting worse and worse. And they had actually had their whole house remediated. So we knew their house was clean, and we could not figure out what was going on because he was still having these behavioral flares. It turns out their mattress, one day they flipped their mattress over, and the mattress was full of mold, and got rid of the mattress. Mom's asthma improved, went back to being normal, and we were able to get his symptoms under control. So, and it's always, I always say it's not, we don't always cure everything.
Sure.
What we do is we understand what's happening, and we get the system in balance, whatever it is. And a lot of times that may mean we are able to get rid of the medications or whatever, the steroids or whatever they're taking. But the most importantly is, what is the underlying issue, and are we able to get that under control?
So why does something like mold, and we can use this as a analogy for many things in integrative and functional medicine, but why does something like mold affect some people so outrageously, some people as an underlying layer, and others not at all?
Yeah, so it's about 25% of the population their bodies don't tag and excrete mold. So we could have, and if you're in a family, you've got very similar genetics. So chances are more than one person at home is going to be impacted.
Right.
But it's not always the case. Or if you're in a school, because a lot of schools have mold. Like I know if we get a call from a certain number of schools in Charlotte, we need to have our radar up to check this kid to make to see what's happening from the mold realm. But you can have those people who don't excrete the mold, they will get more sick more quickly, generally speaking. Okay. But for all of us, if you're in a significant mold exposure for a long enough period of time, and anybody can get sick.
Yeah. So this is pretty deep work, right? This is like very focused. You're spending a lot of one-on-one time with the child and the parents trying to translate these symptoms from somebody who can't really communicate that well, i.e. a little kid. I know that my 2-year-old son, Atlas, didn't have the best vocabulary to explain what was going on, inside of his little head. So this can be really targeted, complex work, but also you've been able to translate this to something that is much more broad. And I would say a good first step for every parent who is, even before they become a parent, to learn about what they can do to support their child. And so I want to shift gears and talk about your book a little bit, because this was a huge effort to get this information, to translate the super complex down into something that could be followed in a number of fairly simple steps for anybody to go out and kind of put their best foot forward when it comes to integrative health. So how did you think about putting all of this together in the first place and getting this out in the world?
Yeah, once you realize how, I always say once you sort of realize the recipe of how to set the foundation, because even whether it's mold exposure or asthma or anything like that, we all need the same things, right? We need to decrease inflammation. We need to have adequate amounts of omega-3 fats. we need enough magnesium, we need enough zinc, we need enough of our B vitamins. And it's none of this is outrageously off the charts, complex per se, but we just need to know what are kids eating? Are they getting adequate amounts of these things? And what do they need to add in? And it's like omega-3 fats are a really good example, is we need good, healthy cell walls. That allows nutrient exchange, right? It allows these nice fluid cells. And if you're not eating cold water fish like salmon, mackerel, tuna, once a week at least, and plant-based forms would be chia seed, flaxseed, hemp seed, blueberries have a little bit, you're not getting adequate amounts.
Yeah.
And if you're not getting adequate amounts, your baseline cells are more of a pro-inflammatory state. So you can be doing everything. Again, you could have a perfect environment, but we have to have the baseline nutrients that we need.
Right.
And so it wasn't, in the book, that's what I laid it out of, first of all, if you're at home, maybe you don't have access to an integrative pediatrician, how do we do this assessment? How do I go through? And I have an assessment that we created, and you can look at their skin. Do they have dark circles? Do they have bumps on their cheeks, on their arms? How are their bowel movements, right? Are they having a bowel movement every day? Do they have stomach aches? Do they have headaches? Do they have asthma? Is it well controlled? Do they sleep well at night? Do they have good energy? So you go through and you look at that, right? And then you look at, okay, if the 5 triggers of inflammation are, again, food, environmental allergies, environmental toxins, infectious diseases, and stress, how do we decrease our exposure to those things? So we look at that, and then we go through and we say, okay, what are we going to eat? Do we need to take dairy out? I always start with a mini cleanse. So we take out decreased sugar, right? Decrease artificial colors and dyes, increase fiber, right? Fruits, vegetables, nuts and seeds, take out processed meats, processed fat. So if you're eating fast food 4 times a week, maybe you only do it twice a week, right? Start things slow. So anyway, we do that, and then I talk families through how to add some key strategic supplements, and then we always want to be looking. Sometimes we can add certain foods back in that we maybe took out, and then we look at what's the roadmap. What does your child and family need over the long term to maintain their base? So it's step by step, and it's about creating really healthy cell walls, supporting digestion so that we can break our fats down. Our fats make up our hormones. Our proteins that we break down and absorb make up our neurotransmitters that help us sleep and do our math. So it's just looking at the pieces of the puzzle and making sure we have the natural resources so that the kids can synthesize what their bodies need.
It sounds to me like if there is a proactive approach or even just attention, right? Attention to this. If parents in general read your book and started following some of those steps, it may actually be fairly simple, right? But it's when we dip into that complex chronic disease or multiple layered chronic diseases, that's when it becomes really complex. That's when we have to do the deep detective work. It gets expensive with labs. It gets expensive with supplements because we're trying to get back to that baseline. Is there, when you do talk to parents about that proactive approach and like how, and I think that's, the same with everything in life, right? It's the same with business. If we were all proactive about our businesses, if we're proactive about our health, if we're proactive about our relationships, we'd probably be in a much better place across the board. But how do you talk to parents about that?
Yeah, I always laugh. I think dentists are one of the dental profession has figured out how to be really proactive. Yeah. That was also part of why I wrote the book, is because I usually get families when they're at a pain point. They've been to 2 or 3 different doctors. They're struggling. because it's a lot of work to make these changes in the world that we live in. Because you go to the grocery store and there just aren't, what is available to eat is not really healthy. And it's hard. You can sometimes feel like you're, swimming up a stream without a paddle.
Right.
But once you start to do it, and it really is, we get emails from people all over the globe saying, hey, we did this and we went off of Miralax, we decreased our asthma medications. And that is the best, because I really think 50 to 60% of the time, if your kiddo has just one of the more common childhood illnesses, you can implement what I've written in the book in kind of a DIY fashion, and you can get our supplements online.
Yeah.
You're able to do a whole lot at home.
It's great.
And do it with the whole family.
Yeah. How much better does it work if the whole family participates?
Oh, you have to. Yeah. I don't even, when parents come in to see me about the kids, we sometimes won't be able to take them on if they won't do it.
Sure.
If they're, if one of the parents is very opposed to it, because it's just too much work.
Yeah.
And it's not, I don't want to ask you to do something and set you up for failure. So I want to paint the picture. We get them really excited. We have a health coach who works with our families, and she can meet them at the grocery store. She can do all the things. But the part of what I love is that when the parents do it, they'll come back and they'll say, I stopped my reflux medications. My headaches are better. I'm sleeping better. I've actually started running again because I feel better. I have my energy back.
Yeah.
And it's, you just have to do it, because it's too, willpower is not, we just can't rely on willpower. I mean, when I went off of gluten and dairy, it was a huge shift in my own health. But if I'm in the same house, like when we go on vacation in the summertime with my whole family, it is really hard to stay away from those things if it's there.
Oh, yeah.
But if you just don't have it at home, you kind of figure out your restaurants where you can go that you like and you don't feel deprived. Yeah. It's not a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, it's been one of the greatest gifts for my health is just following along with what needs to be done for my children, right, to keep them healthy. And I think we as adults sometimes need an extrinsic motivator, and children are a really good extrinsic motivator to get our own health in order. So, for anybody who's coming to see you, they can just think about it as they get like a 4 for the price of 1.
There,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah, they get their kid treated and then they get all the positive side effects from that. That's
what I always say, because the way that we do our supplements, our nutrition, it's a universal way, and it applies for the whole family.
Yeah.
And it's like integrative medicine 101.
Yeah.
And
so speaking of integrative medicine 101, you don't just work with kiddos and their families. You actually have mentored practitioners as well. Talk about this trail blazing and coming back full circle. Not only did you really become a pioneer in this, but now you're helping other very interested and curious practitioners find their way, because there's a lot more when it comes to the implementation side than there is just from the knowledge. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about that.
Yes. Yeah. So we would get so many calls from practitioners saying, how do you do this? How do you do this? And I love to help other practitioners. One of the things that you learn over the years, though, is you can't say yes to everything, because then you'd end up on the phone for an hour helping, right? Which again, I love to do.
Yeah, but there's a fair trade of value there.
Love to play pickleball, and I love to do that. So we started, and we did a cohort, and we did 2 different cohorts for 2 years. We took a little bit of a pause right now, but what we do, and doing it allows us to show that path of what we're doing and how to do it. And especially with eczema and with asthma, because these things, it's not a just do this and that's it.
Yeah.
You have to have that back and forth. And what we do also offer is practitioners can go right onto our website and sign up for an hour-long consult, so we can keep it super individualized also. And we'll go through their case with them, right? They can present the case. But that is also what I love about our mentorship program, is that practitioners can bring their cases, and then you talk about it in real time. Because it's like, we're not teaching all of the base concepts of integrative and functional medicine.
Right.
We're just teaching how to implement this and how to make it happen. And that's what, if anybody is interested, they can email support@SheilaKilbane.com, and we can kind of talk about where we are with that. But that is one of the things I do love to do, is to help to support other practitioners in how to implement this. Yeah. You all can teach them how to run the business, and I'll share how we help the kids.
I love that. And you're actually going to be you're keynoting our conference here. I don't know when this will air, but we're going to get to see each other in just a few more days down in San Antonio, which is going to be so cool.
I know.
And you get to teach a whole room about this integrative pediatrics and your approach to that. I'm curious, kind of as a final question, what do you do for yourself to stay proactive and healthy?
Yes, love that. So I'm a diehard yoga. I started practicing yoga during medical school, and I was a gymnast as a kid, so it felt very, kind of gives me I can do handstands and keep that sensation. So that, as long as I can do yoga 2 to 3 times per week, and I play pickleball, and I meditate usually meditate in the evenings, and I do have you ever heard of the 5-minute journal?
I have.
You might have even told me about it.
I think I gave you the 5-minute journal.
You probably did. Listen, I'm going to give you your own advice.
I have.
That was an absolute game changer. And I just, I get I'm a no-lined journal person. Yep. So I write at night, I have my main things that I write during, about for the next day.
That's great.
And so those are the things. And getting outside. Like, I have a thing with myself that I have to be outside barefooted, even if it's just for a few minutes every day. And if I've gone a few days and haven't done it, it can completely tell.
Yeah. Just get back to the basics.
Yep.
Movement, grounding, nutrition.
Yeah.
Some cold water exposure every once in a while.
Yes. I've been off of that for a minute, but my love is doing cold plunges in the morning.
Yeah, love that. Amazing. Well, Sheila, is there anything else that you'd love to share with this wide-ranging audience that we have?
Yeah, I think just if you're a practitioner thinking about this, just take little steps, right? It's like everything. Do the things with yourself first, and then you start to implement it in your practice. And just ask questions, and it's common sense. Because I think we've thrown common sense out the window in certain aspects of medicine. And food, just start with some food and breathing, like Andrew Weil taught us. And it has been the most satisfying. I got my love of medicine back once I started practicing this way.
I love that. Well, Sheila, thank you. Thank you personally for taking such good care of my family for so many years. We are so much stronger and healthier because of working directly with you. And thank you for your friendship that we've had over all of these years, and many more to come. This has been such a treat.
Well, thank you. I appreciate all that you're doing.
Thanks for tuning in today. And if this episode resonates with you and you're ready to take the next step to grow your own practice, then just click on the link with the video description or head to Freedom Practice Coaching below, where we can give you an assessment and a strategy session for free. Really understand and see where your practice is and understand how to achieve your goals in the future. Also, make sure you hit the subscribe button on whatever platform you are listening to. And there are many more podcasts and episodes to come on varying topics, from clinical expertise to business fundamentals. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the Freedom RX podcast.